Hi, everybody. Today is April 25th, 2026. My name's Kathleen Walker, and I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy to recover from the trauma of watching my little brother be locked up by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government, David Eby as leader, Nikki Sharma as Attorney General, for 588 days after we had visited at will for 64 years. They locked Paul away after I complained to the Burnaby police about what I discovered to be a secret and what I alleged to be a fraudulent and forged power of attorney the government created to give Paul the COVID-19 shot on February 1st of 2021. So Paul, I did everything that I could think of legally. I went to the Supreme Court of Canada twice applying for permission, leave to appeal. I was never granted leave to appeal. And on April 15th, 2 years ago, 2024, I got an email from my sister's lawyer. So the government had appointed my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who had only met Paul on a few occasions over the course of his life and who did not understand his speech or communication. They appointed her as his guardian. And they told her that after I had complained to the police in August of 2022 that she had to do something, and what she did was through her lawyer told me that my visits with Paul were permanently terminated. I was Paul's last surviving local family member and visitor. I was the only one to take him out of his group home, so he was locked up for 588 days. Paul was my last surviving family member as well. So I did everything that I could think of legally. I complained to the BC Human Rights Tribunal, the same tribunal that just assessed a $750,000 fine against an elderly Chilliwack school trustee, Barry Neufeld. And they slow-walked, the BC government asked them to slow-walk the investigation and my complaint. And I never heard from them until after Paul had died, and they asked me if I wanted to proceed. So on April 15th, 2 years ago, I got an email from the nun's lawyer. She had two law firms working for her. I estimate the Catholic Church spent about $2 million on legal fees representing her locking up my brother and then subsequently having me declared a vexatious litigant. So I got an email at about 7 o'clock on April 15th of 2024 from my sister's lawyer saying that Paul had had a stroke, but that I could arrange a visit through him at Burnaby General. So I dropped everything and raced over to Burnaby General. What I found out was that Paul had actually had a stroke 2 days earlier, and my sister had left him alone to languish at Burnaby Hospital to see if he would live or die. When he didn't die, then she flew in from Ontario, and she only allowed me a 10-minute per day visit with him, although I sat in the hallway for 10 to 12 hours a day. They let me visit him after he had a stroke because they wouldn't let me visit him before that because I could have gotten an authentic sample of a signature. As I said, the signature on this power of attorney was a fraud and a forgery, and I know that because I taught Paul to print the only word that he could ever print, his first name, Paul. It took me about a year as a little girl to teach him, laboriously teaching him P-A-U-L. So I got a phone call on April 21st of 2024. I got a phone call out of the blue while I was sitting in the hallway waiting to visit Paul from the Burnaby police saying that they had been ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. I went to court the next morning and asked the judge to suspend the nun's guardianship of Paul pending the RCMP investigation, but we didn't get on, so no decision was made. But by that point, the nun knew that I had been contacted by the RCMP, and I had been informed that they were ordered to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. So within 2 hours, of the nun finding out that I had been contacted by the RCMP about the reopened investigation. Paul was dead. When I went to visit him that day, on April 22nd of 2024, his oxygen mask had been removed. He had a ventilator, an oxygen mask for the previous 10 days, but it had been removed. When I walked in the room, the nun wouldn't look me in the eye. She avoided eye contact, and she said through gritted teeth, "Say goodbye to Paul, he's dying." What I believe had happened is she ordered the treating doctor, Dr. Michael Baker, to remove Paul's oxygen mask and all medical supports and to sedate him to death. I believe that they did medical assistance in dying on Paul, although he was not capable. There was a certificate saying that he was incapable and he was not capable of consenting to being killed by this doctor. But he appeared to me, he was totally still. His eyes were wide open and unfocused. His oxygen mask had been removed. As I said, all medical supports had been removed except for the intravenous. I believe that he was sedated to death. So after Paul died, the nun pursued me. She flew in from Ontario and had her two law firms take me to court to have me declared. There was a 4-day hearing to have me declared a vexatious litigant. And the judge, although I had medical certificates, I suffer from a potentially life-threatening cardiac condition. I had a heart attack in 2016. And I had medical certificates saying I couldn't appear in court for longer than 2 hours per day. I was formerly a psychologist for the government of British Columbia, and then I went to law school, and I practiced law for 23 years. But I had a heart attack in 2016, and I had medical certificates from a cardiologist and my family doctor saying I couldn't appear in court for longer than 2 hours per day. And all the judges that we had appeared before had recognized that and accepted that. But the judge hearing this application to have me designated permanently a vexatious litigant, taking away all of my rights and access to the courts, went ahead and had 2 full-day hearings. So I had to leave after 2 hours. So the designation was made in my absence. My designation permanently as a vexatious litigant for trying to visit my brother was made in my absence and against doctor's orders. After I was declared a vexatious litigant, I applied to the Court of Appeal of British Columbia. I was not, my application to set aside that designation was dismissed, and I applied for permission to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. And again, the Supreme Court of Canada didn't even allow me permission to appeal, to grant leave to appeal. So while all of this was going on, I wasn't really paying attention to the development of euthanasia in Canada. So in 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada reversed a 20-year-old decision, a final decision, where it rejected euthanasia in Canada as being against public policy. And even though the person who was making the application was long dead, was a woman named Kay Carter. She had spinal stenosis, which is not a fatal, it's a fusion of the spine, which is uncomfortable, but it's not fatal. But even though she had already died, the Supreme Court of Canada allowed her leave to appeal and had a unanimous, anonymous decision changing the law of murder in Canada and the prohibition against euthanasia, because it said that Kay Carter might not be able to commit suicide by the time she was terminally ill. Since that time, they've continually expanded the kind of people that what happens is regular doctors and nurses kill people extrajudicially, so there's no judicial or legal oversight of these killings, executions by the state. Your taxpayer funds are used to pay a regular doctor or nurse to administer a lethal injection, it's a poison that was not intended for that purpose. It paralyzes the persons and their lungs fill up with fluid, so they drown in their own fluids. and they expanded on an exponential basis, so that Canada is the greatest killer executor of its citizens by lethal injection in the world as euthanasia by far. There's only 4 countries in the world that allow euthanasia: Canada, Switzerland, Holland, and Spain. So it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the world's population. There's 195 recognized countries in the world, and only 4 allow euthanasia, and none as severely or as horrifically as Canada. Canada kills more than 45 people every single day. So Canada, Mark Carney used your taxpayer funds to execute extrajudicially more than 45 people today. 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada is caused by a doctor administering a lethal injection, but they're not allowed to put the actual cause of death, which is poison by a lethal injection, on the death certificate. They have to list as the cause of death the complaint of the person who was dying or who was killed. They don't have to be dying, and they don't need to have a reasonable prospect of death. So, for example, it might be multiple sclerosis would be put down as the cause of death instead of euthanasia by a lethal injection, which is going to totally skew the statistics. We won't have accurate death statistics in Canada. So all that it takes is the signatures of any 2 medical professionals, any doctor, any nurse, and there's a doctor in Vancouver who boasts that she's executed over 1,000 people this way. So it doesn't go before a judge. It's the signatures of any 2 medical professionals, and these are people that do health or actual medical. Medical comes from the Greek to heal. It's a verb, to heal. So any 2 medical professionals sign a piece of paper. The person signs a piece of paper. The couple of instances that have come up is one woman, an elderly woman, who had been pressured by her husband to be killed, to be executed extrajudicially this way, had changed her mind. And so one of the witnesses, the medical witnesses, scratched his name off the document, the piece of paper, which is not sworn. It's just a piece of paper. And so they just found another witness, and they killed her anyways, even though she had changed her mind. She said she didn't want to be killed. Another woman, 84-year-old woman, went into the Vancouver General Hospital emergency with what turned out to be a broken tailbone. But they didn't even ask her what was wrong with her. The physician walked up to her and said, "We've decided to offer you MAiD." So they've created this euphemism for this disgusting promotional euphemism for executing people extrajudicially this way, and they call it medical assistance in dying, or MAiD. And everybody banters around this word, this new made-up word by the federal government. So today I just wanted to briefly remind you of the reasons, if you're arguing against euthanasia or the state executing people extrajudicially this way. I asked Gemini asked artificial intelligence what the argument was against euthanasia, and this is what it said. There's no way, for all medical procedures, there has to be informed consent. There's no way for anyone to give informed consent to being killed, because we don't know what death is. No one has ever come back from death. So some people believe that you go to heaven or hell or purgatory. That, for example, I'm Catholic, and that's in my religion. I believe that my loved ones who have died have gone to heaven. There's some people who believe that there's just a cessation of existence. You just cease to exist. But the most populations or the most populous belief in the world is reincarnation, so that you come back as another entity or another animal. But nobody knows. So there's no way for anyone to consent, to give informed consent to being killed. The next argument is that the reason we've stopped capital punishment or the hanging of convicted killers or murderers in Canada and many places in the world have banned capital punishment is because it's irrevocable. It's final. You can't correct it. If you make a mistake, my grandfather was a lawyer, then a judge, but when he was a lawyer, he lost two of his clients to hanging. They were hanged. One was an Indigenous man, and the other one was an immigrant from Sweden whose English was very poor. And my grandfather was devastated by the loss of these two clients. So we've stopped hanging people in Canada in 1999. The law changed because it's irrevocable, it's irreversible, it's final, and you can't correct it. So people can never, the convenient thing that people like about euthanasia is that no one can ever complain. Doctors love it because they can bury their mistakes. And the third argument that Gemini, artificial intelligence gave me it's the false argument of implementation. So in February of 2015, when the Supreme Court of Canada said that the Canadian government could execute extrajudicially people as medical care, they said that they put it on hold, and they said they had 1 year to develop guardrails or legal system of ensuring that nobody was improperly executed this way. And that's the false argument of implementation, that if only people could implement it right, that in the history of civilization for 40,000 years, even Neanderthals did not execute their elderly, ill, or disabled members of their community. And as I said, of 195 countries in the world and the vast 8 billion people on the planet, the infinitesimal minority allow the extrajudicial execution of people as euthanasia. So the Supreme Court of Canada tasked the government of Canada, which has made mistakes and is ineffectual in many, many ways, with doing something that's never successfully been done in the history of civilization for 40,000 years. They were going to have 12 months to come up with a system that would prevent the errors, like the woman changing her mind but being killed anyways, or the 84-year-old woman going into emergency and being offered euthanasia as medical care. So those are the 3 points that you can raise if you're discussing with people. Of course, there's an infinite number of other reasons why it's morally and practically an egregious. Every civilization that's ever tried it, like the Mayans and the Inca, the Aztecs, have failed horribly. So, 1, you can't consent. There's no such thing as informed consent. 2, it's permanent. And 3, there's no way of developing a system that will prevent these horrific miscarriages of justice, of killing people who never should have been killed or executed extrajudicially. So that's it for now. I love you all. I'm just in the middle of, actually finished my 10,000 steps for today. Mount Baker was gorgeous. I posted a little video of Mount Baker, so you're welcome to look at it. I love you all. Take care, everyone.